Hello everyone, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Keisha and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of May. I managed to read 13 books in the month of May, and I do have them split into different categories, so without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump into the first one. The first book is a book that I carried over from a previous month. So I did start this book in April, but I finished it in May, and that is On Spine of Death by Tamara Berry. You guys have probably already heard me talk about Tamara Berry quite a bit. This is my favorite cozy mystery series, and Tamara Berry is my new favorite cozy mystery author. Buried in a Good Book was the first book in this series, and it is still my favorite to this day. This is the follow-up to that, and I loved this one, not quite as much as the first one, but it was still 5 stars, so this is a trending 5-star series for me. I'm very excited to dive into the third book, which I recently hauled. It came out in May, but if you don't know what this cozy mystery series is about, it is about this woman named Tess Harrow, and she is a thriller writer, and she and her daughter Gertie are going to Winthrop, Washington, which is a beautiful place. If you haven't looked it up before, you should, because it looks amazing and like somewhere I definitely want to visit someday. But anyways, they go there and they stay at Tess's grandfather's cabin that he left to her after he passed. And when she shows up, the sky starts raining body parts and fish guts and all that fun stuff, and there is a mystery to be solved. One thing that I love about this series is the banter between the detective and the sleuth. I also just really love the setting and all of the characters. In the first book, there is a Bigfoot sighting, and there's just something special about each one of these. I absolutely love it. It is such a quick, witty, fun read that just makes me so happy to experience. So that is well, it wasn't the first book that I read in May, but I guess it's the first book that I'm talking about. So that's number one. The next book I want to talk about is the best book that I read in the month of May, and that is going to be Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. Now, this is going to confuse some people. So I've recently talked to my friend Gwen about my wonky star rating system. It makes absolutely no sense. I don't know how to explain this to you other than I apparently can have a book that is my favorite of the month that is not a 5-star. Because by all stretch of the means of what I say, this being a 5-star book, this should be my favorite of the month when this is only a 4.5, right? But that's not really how it works. So I don't know how to explain it. I just need you to trust me that I love these books. And I don't always know how to rate things, especially when they're in different genres. But just know that my enjoyment level of this book was so high. I really loved reading Every Summer After. It is a childhood, friends to lovers, second chance romance, which is my favorite romance trope. And it takes place at this cabin on a lake. This family ends up buying a summer home, and Percy, who her actual name is Persephone, but she goes by Percy, she goes with her family to this vacation home that they bought on this lake, and the neighbors have 2 boys, and Sam is one of the boys that she falls for, and this is their budding friendship relationship. It does jump back and forth in timelines between their childhood when they first met to now when they are like meeting again as adults after something happened all these years ago. I really did love Carly Fortune's writing in this one. A lot of people compare this to Love in Other Words, and I am one of those people that compare it to Love in Other Words. We will get to that in a minute. But there are a lot of similarities, like a lot, with the characters, with the setting, with what happens. There is so many similarities with these 2 books. So I don't really know how that happened in the writing world, but nonetheless, I do see there is a difference in the books in writing style, in atmosphere, and what happens, and like what you enjoy in books. I think that depends on like which one you're gonna like more. But for me, I think Every Summer After has to take the cake. This was a 4.5-star read for me because for the most part of the book, it was a 5-star feeling up until the very end. And then I just kind of felt a little icky, but it didn't ruin the whole book for me. I still really enjoyed my read of this, so it's a 4.5-star. Next is the book that I enjoyed the least this month, and this is actually also my most disappointing read. I was thrilled when I found out about this book coming out called The Faint of Heart by Carrie Lynn Wilson. I got an advanced reader copy through NetGalley of this book, and I was so excited to read it and hype it up. Unfortunately, it ended up only being a 2-star for me. So essentially, this is set in a kind of dystopian type world, or maybe utopia. Well, I don't know that it's utopian because it doesn't feel like that, but it's set up in a world that kind of reminds me of The Giver, which is why I say utopia. But essentially what it's about is there are all of these people that have given up their hearts. They've had their hearts removed, so now they can no longer feel pain or anxiety or hurt or anger or sadness or any of the negative emotions. But the bad thing is, not only when you remove your heart are you removing your negative emotions, you're also removing your positive emotions. So people are just very numb and dull. But there's one girl, our main character, who decided to keep her heart, and she's also now trying to save her sister, who she feels like she's lost. And there's some stuff that happens along the way. I don't want to say a lot because it is a short graphic novel and you'll get through it pretty quick. But I thought this would be a really cool deep dive into the importance of our emotions. But funnily enough, a book about removing your heart and emotions and stuff did not really make me emotional. I felt very disconnected from the story, very disconnected from the characters. I honestly just didn't really care very much about the story. And I hate to say that. I feel like it was just okay. It's not the book for me, but if any of that sounds interesting to you, maybe give it a try. Just know going in that as a graphic novel, it's not going to delve really deep into things. I feel like it could have delved a little deeper even as a graphic novel, but it didn't. So yeah, that had to have been my least favorite and most disappointing read of the month. The next books I want to talk about were rereads for me. So the first reread that I did was, of course, Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. I read this book about 4 years ago when I was first getting back into reading, and it was one of the first romance books that I'd ever read. I'd read another like when I was younger, but really as an adult, this was one of the first romances that I really got into. Upon initial read, I absolutely fell in love with the story. I rated the book 4.5 stars because young Keisha had not yet experienced smut and she didn't like it. I'm not saying that I like it now, but I'm definitely more numb to it, or I guess accustomed to it in books, so it doesn't alarm me as much as it did when I read this book. But I will say, for lack of a better term, there are some authors that write a little bit trashier, like in the way that they describe smut. And I would say that Christina Lauren and also Colleen Hoover are two that kind of give me that vibe. So they don't have as like eloquent of a way, or at least it's not my preferred way of talking about smut. But regardless, I really loved this book when I read it the first time. The second time, I did love the book, but I noticed because I did the one thing that everybody tells you not to do, and I read this after Every Summer After, and I was convinced before I reread it that I was still going to love this one more because I had such fond memories of Macy and Elliot. And the time in my life that I read this, I mean, I had all the feelings for this book. However, upon reread, I'm going to give this 4 stars, whereas Every Summer After is 4.5. There were definitely some things in the book that I had problems with. I do think that this was more of a telling of a relationship than a showing of a relationship, and I've learned throughout my reading of romance books that that is something that I come across every now and then. There are some authors that tell you people are in love, but you can't really sense it and feel that chemistry, and then there are other authors that really show you a couple's love and show you why like they are in love, how they came to love each other, and more of their relationship. And I feel like Carly Fortune just did that a little bit better than Christina Lauren in this one. So while I still have a very special place in my heart for Macy and Elliot, this was a little bit slower paced. The book was longer, and I don't feel like it needed to be that long. And I do feel like there's just a little bit extra in this book, and the ending in this one also, I mean, the ending in both kind of makes anyone, I feel like, mad. And for some reason, even though it's more justifiable that I was mad in the other book, I was more mad in this book, but it makes no sense because I used to not even be mad about the situation in this book. So it just goes to show that as you grow up and as you grow in your reading, your tastes change, and sometimes when you reread books, they're not your favorites anymore. So I still love this book. It still has a special place in my heart, but Every Summer After has definitely exceeded like this one for me as far as like which one I prefer over the other. And the reason that I compare them, because I know some people get annoyed when you compare books, and I do compare books a lot, but with these being such similar romances, it's really hard not to compare. The next reread that I did was Poison for Breakfast by Lemony Snicket, and I actually tabbed a little bit of it this time upon reread. I read this one a couple years ago. I did receive an advanced reader copy of this book, and I love Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, so I knew that I had to check out something else by him. This is... honestly, I'm not really sure the age category for this. It's not middle grade, but it definitely doesn't read like adult either. I think it's something for all ages, but I feel like adults would appreciate it more because a middle grade kid is not going to really understand. This book is written in a stream of consciousness writing style, which is not always my favorite, but I really love the way that Lemony Snicket like breaks the fourth wall and has this stream of consciousness writing. This story actually follows Lemony Snicket as he is eating breakfast one morning and he finds this note on the floor that says, you ate poison for breakfast. And instead of doing what a normal person, I say normal, but instead of doing what you would expect somebody to do who has found out they've been poisoned, like going to the doctor, he decides that he is going to go to every place, like the source of all of his food basically, and try to figure out what was poisoned. And I love the random rabbit trails and thoughts that are just thrown throughout this book. I will say, and you can tell it by my tabbing if you can see it there, that honestly the first half of this book is better. If the second half of the book was as good as the first half of the book, then it probably would be like a 4-star read for me, or maybe even a 5. But because the second half kind of teeters off a little bit, it's just a 3. But it's still a book that I really love and recommend and want to have on my shelves. So I actually gave it 3 stars the first time that I read it. So this is the same rating I gave it the first time, so I enjoyed it just as much. Next, I'm going to talk about books that I read for a readathon. In May, I hosted my 3rd round of Bookathon, which is kind of crazy. I started this spooky middle grade readathon a year ago in May with my friend Ashley, and I literally had no idea that this was going to be something I wanted to do twice a year and keep going. But spooky middle grade books just have a special place in my heart. There are lots of great messages there, not only for kids, but for adults as well. So I do have a stack of books here that I'll quickly go through that I read for the readathon. The first one was a last minute addition. I read The Legend of Skeleton Man. I technically only read The Skeleton Man because this is like a 2-book compilation. This is by Joseph Bruchac, and it is following Molly, whose father grew up on the Mohawk Reserve of Aquasansi. I'm probably not saying that right. And he's always told her about the story of the Skeleton Man. And then one day, her parents don't come home, and her uncle ends up having to take care of her, and it just seems a little bit fishy, like what's going on. So I feel like this is a good classic ghost story. I did give this 3.5 stars, so I thought it was a solid read. The next one that I read is our buddy read, or our group read for Bookathon, and that was What Lives in the Woods by Lindsay Curry. This was such an amazing experience, not only to read this with my co-hosts Kendall and Hope, and then everybody that participated in the readathon, but I also got to chat with Lindsay Curry because we had her on our live show discussion of this book, and that was just an incredible experience altogether. I found out that Lindsay describes her books as heartwarming horror. That's kind of what she writes. So she's not writing like the classic scary story. She's not necessarily writing the scary story that has like the great message in it. She's writing more of like a little bit historical with a little bit more heartwarming thrown in there as well. Each of the places that she writes about are either set in Chicago, or the people come from Chicago. Like this girl is moving to Michigan from Chicago, and her parents are trying to renovate this old manor, but there's always history in her stories. And again, it is very like heartwarming horror, so it's not going to end really scary. It's going to turn around and make you go "aw" versus make you go "ah." So that's a good way to think about it, but this is a solid 4-star read for me as well. The next book that I read was Disappearing House by Ali Maleninko, and this was probably my favorite Bookathon read. I gave this 4.5 stars, and it follows our main character, Jack. And Jack had cancer, and she is approaching her 5-year cancer diagnosis and is hoping to be declared Ned. Around this same time, she is starting to worry that she's experiencing symptoms again that she experienced when she first was, like before she was first diagnosed with cancer. So she's having some anxiety around that. And around that same time, there is a house that appears at the end of the street that was not there before. It kind of appeared out of nowhere, and she is dared to go inside. So her and her friend go inside, and there's a lot that they unpack in this house. So this was a really good story. You guys know, and if you don't know, I'm telling you now, that some of my favorite spooky middle grade books are ones that deal with real life fears and have really great life lessons, and I feel like this is a really good one, and one that is great for kids that may be dealing with cancer or anxieties around stuff like this. I feel like this is great representation for those kids in that community, and also it's just really great and insightful for me to read as an adult. So this was definitely a great one. Then I read a couple of graphic novels. I read Bunnicula by James Howe and Andrew Donkin. This is based off of the original novel by Deborah and James Howe. I loved this possibly more than the original. I grew up reading Bunnicula, and I absolutely loved it, and this graphic novel was just hands down so incredibly amazing. I just feel like it really brought the story to life for me. You can see that the art style is a little bit more hard lines, but and I wasn't like super crazy about it. I wasn't sure if I was going to like it because of that, but it was so good. And again, I really just feel like it brought these characters and the story to life. If you don't know what Bunnicula is, it follows a cat and a dog, and they end up having this new pet come into their family that's a bunny, and the cat mostly thinks that the bunny might be a vampire, and chaos ensues from there. The other graphic novel that I read is Cat's Cradle by Jo Rue. This one is The Golden Twine. It is book 1 in the series. It is not so much a spooky middle grade as it is a fantasy that has some creepy elements, but it follows this girl who really wants to be a monster hunter, and she is working at this caravan. Well, she's not really working at this caravan camp. She's kind of like a, what do they call her? Not a hermit. What's it called? She is an orphan street urchin, and she travels with a merchant camp. She's very self-confident, clever, and ambitious, and this bodes well for her in a lot of situations. And there is something that ends up in a wagon, like there's a new wagon that comes into this camp, and she thinks there might be a monster in there, and she's like really determined to tame it. So this was a really good one. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, and I definitely plan on continuing in the series. Next, I want to talk about a book that I added to my TBR last minute pretty randomly, and that is What's Up Beanie by Alina Tasso. My friend Rachel talked about this and said that she really enjoyed this comic graphic novel. This is set up really similar to how Debbie Tung does her comics that are like real life relatable comics. And this follows our main character Beanie from when she was a child to now, and just different things that she went through in her life. It does definitely have some relatable content, but overall I just gave this one a 3-star. I feel like it's a good read, but it's definitely a coffee table book. Next, I want to talk about an audiobook that I listened to this month, and it was actually inspired by Bookathon as well because I still wanted to read spooky middle grade. So I listened to Doll Bones by Holly Black, and I was pleasantly surprised by this one. I do love Holly Black, and is it Tony? I don't have it in here, but Tony DiTerlizzi, I think. They wrote the Spiderwick Chronicles middle grade series that's fantasy that I really, really liked, and I ended up liking this as well. I would also say this is more heartwarming horror, and it follows a group of kids and this doll. One of the kids, he was playing, I can't remember their names, but the boy in the story was playing with action figures with his friends who played with dolls, and his dad or his stepdad took away his action figures and he was like, you need to grow up, son. It's time for you to be a man, or something silly like that. And so he didn't want to tell his friends that he couldn't play anymore, so he starts acting weird and doesn't hang out with them and stuff. But essentially, one of the friends has a doll that they find out is made from like the bones of an actual person, and so they're trying to unravel this mystery and figure out like, is this doll sinister and all this different stuff. It was a really interesting story. Not anything super memorable, but definitely heartwarming horror. So if you like Lindsay Curry, I think you might like this book as well. I gave this one 3.5 stars. And the last book that I want to talk about is a book that just sent me into an emotional turmoil that caused a lot of chaos in my life. And that book is One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have found that I really enjoy Taylor Jenkins Reid's backlist. This woman just has a knack for making you think about what you would do in crazy situations. So in this story, you have a woman who had a high school sweetheart that she married, and a year into their marriage, like right as they are about to approach their wedding anniversary, the husband ends up going down in a helicopter and he is presumed dead. Everybody else is like dead that went down, and they just presume him to be dead. So 3 years later, he comes up out of nowhere and he's back. He's alive. He's actually just been stuck for a little while, but he has been dying to come home to his wife. But now our wife, Emma Blair, I forgot her name for a second, she waited on Jesse, the guy that went down in the helicopter, her husband, her one true love. But then she grieved him and she mourned him, and she felt like it was time for her to move on and find love again. So she found Sam, and now she is engaged to Sam, and Jesse's back. So what do you do in that situation? I don't know. And I spent nights and days screaming and crying and arguing with my husband about our difference in opinion of what we would do in this situation, because it really bothers me that I wouldn't know. But I have come to the conclusion that, number one, the way that I view love in life is probably different than the way that most people view love. I don't feel like love is an emotion. Does love have emotions? Yes. But I feel like love is a choice. And I feel like the way that I view love and the way, like, I do view love and marriage as a more like spiritual institution. And so some of my thought processes are a little bit different. But I loved Sam in this story, and I really felt, I think that's wise. I was feeling like just torn two different ways with like my personal beliefs on love and all that stuff with where she should end up, because both of these guys were really great, but there was just something that was like drawing me to Sam. And I'm not going to say who she ends up picking in the story, but I just knew from like the beginning that just looking at the characters of who each guy was, like which one I would prefer. So I definitely had a favorite throughout the story, but I feel like the way that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes this story, who thinks of stuff like this? And how did she determine which way this was going to go and how? I think it's really crazy, but it took me, you can tell I'm still in emotional turmoil from this, but I will say that while I have like a little bit of a difference in like just the view that I have on love a little bit, and how I do think there was like a lot of lust thrown around in this book too, and I don't think that love and lust are the same thing, and I don't think that physical attraction should be a main drive for anything. I do think, you know, obviously there needs to be physical attraction, but I don't think that's the primary source of your love. And so I just find that sometimes when I read romance books, I'm like, I have to separate myself for a minute and be like, this is a story. This doesn't have to, you know, I can enjoy this to an extent without it being exactly how I would have things be. But I will say this was a really good one, and the emotions that drew out of me from this, I mean, it's a 4.5 star. I'll say that, because it couldn't be a 5 just because I couldn't in good conscience give it a 5 for different reasons, but it's a 4.5, and I really did enjoy this book, and I'm definitely going to pick up more of Taylor Jenkins Reid's backlist. And that is going to be all of the books that I read in the month of May. You'll have to let me know down in the comments below what your favorite book that you read in May was. Remember, mine was Every Summer After, even though it doesn't make any sense because I had a couple 5 stars. I don't remember if I told you what I rated Bunnicula, but this was also a 5 star. But it's just like a difference in genres and a difference in like feelings, how I rate things, and how I don't know how to explain it. Okay, don't come at me. But let me know what your favorite book was down in the comments below. And if you made it this far in the video, go ahead and leave a flower emoji because I am wearing floral today. It is summertime. The flowers are blooming. Well, really, that's spring, but I don't care. I'm wearing florals, so we're going to leave flowers. And if you want to be extra special, you can leave a pink one because I have pink flowers on my shirt. So thank you guys, as always, for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye, friends.